What are your takeaways with the Eagles blowing out the Giants by 26 points, putting up almost 50 points in the process? And do you believe that the Eagles are on a path to capture that number one seed in the NFC right now?
I think they are a team on a mission. I think Jalen Hurts is a man on a mission. But when you talk about how complete this team is, solid offensive line play, ability to run the football at a consistent clip, the ability to get separation at the wide receiver position, the ability to extend plays at the quarterback position with feet, or of course extending on rollouts with being able to throw it kind of off balance with the athleticism of Jalen Hurts. I mean, they are complete. We know that they have one of the best secondaries in the NFL. We know that they have one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. So, I mean, again, Philly just shows week in and week out they are the team to beat. And everybody always says, well, they haven't really beaten anybody. It's okay. I mean, at the end of the day, when you talk about who they lost to, which was the Commanders, they're fighting for a wild card spot, right? The Giants are fighting for a wild card spot, right? They beat the Vikings, who are 10-3 this season. I know it was the second game of the season, but again, to where the Vikings are now, to where the Eagles are now, they're 2 games apart from one another. So again, you can't necessarily say that the Vikings was not a competitive game because the Eagles just locked down and did what they needed to do. Um, and it kind of goes from there. I know that they beat a backup in Cooper Rush in Dallas, but Dallas was coming back in that game. I was actually at that game live. But again, I'm tired of this narrative of who Philly has beaten is excuse me, not good enough, or they're going to falter when it matters the most. They've blown out a multitude of teams, and they're doing what they need to do. You're beating good teams. That's what you're supposed to do, right? And they're beating and blowing out bad teams, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. And I think when you're able to run the ball for 253 total yards, I think you're going to be fine. When you're able to sack the quarterback 7 times, I think you're going to be fine. I understand that the Giants have some injuries. I understand that the Giants don't have a lot of depth. We've already talked about this. Kyle and I both predicted this game to be a pretty big margin of victory. But at the end of the day, this is what you need to do when you want to chase a Super Bowl, when you want to chase a championship. Everybody was able to contribute. Devonta Smith had 64 yards. A.J. Brown had 70 yards. I mean, every single person was able to get their hands on the football this week, and they were able to do what they needed to do and seal a victory in MetLife. Now, they had a garbage time touchdown with a 2-point conversion with Tyrod Taylor in the fourth quarter as time expired. So this game easily could have been even worse. This game could have been, if I'm doing math right, 12-48. Well, not 12, 14-48. That would have been that would have been atrocious. So I know that we have 4 weeks to go. I know that they have to play the Commanders another time. I know they have to play Dallas another time. They got to play New York again. Like, this is going to be a good closeout for the year to kind of put the naysayers aside, because each of those teams that I just listed are playoff teams. But when you look at the Giants, I mean, Daniel Jones wasn't really able to do too much. I mean, at the end of the day, he was able to extend some plays with his legs. He was able to really kind of get out of the pocket, put some balls in some good places. But it's just that Philly defense is swarming. That secondary is just aggressive and ball hawks. And at the end of the day, when you really look at it, there was no chance this was going to happen without Saquon Barkley really going out there and kind of just making his presence felt and known. He only had 28 yards on the ground. So the Eagles dominate. They move to 12-1. The NFC East looks to continue to get smaller in terms of their number for clinching the division, but they did just clinch a playoff berth, which, oh my goodness, is such a surprise. But at the end of the day, man, the Eagles are the team to beat, and they show it week in and week out, man. Jalen Hurts is going to win that MVP.
Well, and that was kind of the angle that I was going to go towards because, Kev, this was one of the most well rounded beatdowns that I've seen from the Eagles the entire year. And granted, there have been some other beatdowns that they've had, specifically that Monday night game early in the year when they beat the Vikings handily. I mean, Kirk Cousins looked like a shell of himself going up against that Eagles defense. And honestly, that Eagles defense made his life a living hell that night. And in this game in particular, this was a big game for the Giants. And I know that they've been dealing with some injuries. They're coming off of that tie against the Commanders last week. And this was a big game for them to try to rebound in a sense, to try to get a dub in the win column here. But Kev, this was a sound victory for the Eagles. And with the win, I mean, to bounce up to a 12-1 record with only just a month to go left in the season. I mean, as far as I see it, they're in the driver's seat to get that number one seed in the NFC. It's just, when I look at the Eagles specifically, the one thing that they're very consistent with is just the complementary play that they have on the offensive side of the ball. And there are times where maybe Jalen will do a little bit more. He'll produce at a higher clip than the run game. But that was the opposite when the Eagles went up against the Giants. The Eagles were extremely effective running the ball. Like Kevin had said, when you rush over 200 yards and you're getting great production from Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, and I know they have Kenneth Gainwell in the backfield as well. That's a tough matchup for any defense to go against. And then when you tie it to the fact that you got Jalen Hurts, who has just been an absolute master this year at the RPO, and he's done a great job in limiting his turnovers, completing a high percentage of his passes. He's distributing the ball to a numerous amount of targets, game in and game out. It just seems from an offensive perspective, the Eagles are probably the best offense in the NFC as far as I see it, just because they do a great job of putting up points consistently. They don't turn the ball over consistently. And when you have Jalen Hurts, who is at the top of the NFL MVP leaderboard as far as I see it, you could make a very credible case that he is the leader right now. There are some other candidates that you could throw out there like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Tua Tagovailoa, but with Jalen leading the way, there's a reason why he's so high, in my opinion. He is the leader of this offense, and the Eagles' offense, they've largely been responsible for the 12-1 record that they have right now. And then to kick it over to the defense has been hellacious for multiple stretches throughout this season. And outside of the one anomaly game where the Commanders scored 30 points, the Eagles defense has mostly been pitching games where they're giving up 15 to maybe 25 points at most. And there's a lot of games in particular where they're holding opponents to under 20 points per game. And if you have that and you combine it with what the offense is able to do, more times than not, you're going to win a football game. And when it comes to this year specifically, in the 13 games that they've played, they've only lost one. And the one game that they lost, the offense was turning the ball over. And that ended up being the biggest factor in that loss against the Commanders. And as far as I see it, when it comes to the rest of the NFC, when you match them up against the Eagles, I don't think they really stack up that well. You have the Cowboys who are in the NFC East, and they're still running neck and neck with the Eagles, but they're still 2 games behind the Eagles at this point. And they're coming off of a game where they just barely beat the worst team in the NFL in the Houston Texans. And then you compare that to what the Eagles did. The Eagles just beat a pretty solid NFC East rival by 4 possessions. You win by 48-22. That's a great beatdown. They almost put up 50 points. It'd be one thing if you beat them by maybe 7 points, 10 points, but by over 25 points, that you got to give a tip of the hat to that, because I was on the mindset that the Eagles had a chance to potentially blow them out, but the way that they did it with just the well-rounded performance of the offense and the defense bringing pass rushes left and right, albeit against an injured Giants offense, they did what they needed to do. And as far as I see it, with some other teams in the NFC, you got the Vikings. Didn't really matter because the Eagles smacked them earlier in the season. And if the Eagles had to go up against the Vikings again, I'd probably bet more times than not with the Eagles than the Vikings, just because I can't rely on Kirk Cousins to make the plays that needed to be made when it comes to the playoffs. The only other team that I would probably throw in the equation here as a team that could be a legitimate threat to the Eagles is probably the 49ers. The reason why is the 49ers have arguably the best defense in the NFL. The 49ers have been doing a great job in forcing opposing offenses to turn the ball over the last couple of weeks. And then the offense, granted they have Brock Purdy, a third string quarterback at the helm. He's been very solid since filling in for Jimmy G when Jimmy G broke his foot last week. And as far as I see it, the Eagles and the 49ers are really those two teams that I think have a really good pathway to potentially get to a Super Bowl. I think it has mostly to do with the Eagles' consistency this year. And then when it comes to the 49ers have the defense that could potentially lead themselves to a Super Bowl. And all Brock Purdy would have to do is just limit his amount of turnovers consistently. And that gives the 49ers a good chance as far as I see it. So I think the Eagles are running and gunning for that number 1 seed. They're only a couple games away from clinching that. I think they will get it. It's just, can they continue this style of play going into the playoffs and not have one of those slip up games where they're turning the ball over consistently. They're giving the opposing team opportunities to score and to turn those turnovers into points. We'll kind of see where it goes from here with the Eagles when we get to that point in January. But as of right now, compared to every team in the NFC, they are the best team in the conference. The only team that I would consider in this equation to really be a legitimate threat to them is probably the 49ers. And it is simply because San Francisco has a hellacious defense. And that is something that could give the Eagles trouble when they get to the playoffs, if they potentially meet each other in the playoffs. But time will tell, and we'll see whether or not that those two teams go up against each other. But yeah, with a month left to go, I think the Eagles are definitely in prime position for not only the number one seed, but a very deep run into the playoffs. And when you have Jalen Hurts playing at the level that he's playing at, he's definitely at the MVP. He's at the top of the MVP discussion as far as I see it. So a great win from the Eagles. I think they're in a great spot right now. And the main thing for them is they just have to finish out the season well. If they're able to do that, there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be shaking in their boots going up against the Eagles, because I'll tell you what, those Philly fans are going to be loud when the playoffs come around. It's just the Eagles better show up, because you do not want those fans going against you, because they don't hold back as far as I see it. But great win for the Eagles, and we'll just see where it goes from here.